Because we have to ask questions about the moral dimensions of our relationship with non-human beings. We have to ask all these axiological questions. All right? If this was just a course in issues in life and death, right, in the philosophy department, then we would just focus in on normative theories. You would learn the big three, right? You would study some natural law theory in passing, because at one time it was an extremely influential and remains a coherent way of organizing, right, our moral theories. You would also study some egotism, right, and relativism. But the point is, you would only consider human needs and human interests, and you would only consider moral status as a human, a property that belongs uniquely to humans. All right. Here, however, we have to ask these non-traditional questions. They're older questions. I suspect, we're caught up in this strongly anthropocentric period, the last few hundred years of Western history, right? But I suspect if you go back, especially more than a couple thousand years, these questions were much more commonly asked. But we don't have records. People didn't write philosophy in those days, as I understand. We haven't discovered their writing. So it seems that Socrates and Plato were among the first people who started writing these things down. Socrates didn't even write anything down. Anyway, but he talked a lot. People wrote stuff down that he said. But we have to ask questions like that, right? Deep questions. What is the source and center of moral value? What is the ultimate unit of moral value? And they may be misleading questions. When we get to Tom Birch, you'll see. He says, those are the wrong kinds of questions. But anyway, we'll stick with them for the time being, because they do take us quite some distance on our journey. But the point is, these axiological questions call for a metaphysical analysis, and for that reason, environmental ethics is somewhat heavier on metaphysics than other ethics courses. All right? So we're trying to become better metaphysical monkeys. The idea is that maybe we can defend a resource protectionist approach without having to rely so much on consequentialist arguments if we become comfortable with the idea that some accounts of the nature of value are more accurate than others, and those normative theories which cling to an anthropocentric axiology might just be fundamentally wrong, right? Is it possible that you could be metaphysically wrong, right? That's an interesting idea, isn't it? I think that's what I insist philosophy provides for us. Confidence without faith. Confidence that metaphysically we're on the right track. Not have any absolute answer, because that would be a commitment to a metaphysics that would be also unacceptable. But anyway, as faith, that would be a crutch, right? But you also don't want to just be stumbling around. You want to have some guidance on these ultimate questions, right? Without throwing your hat in the church ring, or in the ring of the church, or the mosque, or the synagogue, or something. Anyway, but if the radical environmentalists can defend the claim that ecological wholes have independent direct moral status, right? That would be pretty cool if he could actually defend that claim. Of course, Baxter would just say, get the hell out of here, right? Someone like Baxter and someone like Norton and someone like Wilson, they're on different ways, right? Baxter would be the most dismissive of all, right? There's just no way to have access to the moral status of an ecological whole. Baxter would say the whole idea of having moral status is a human idea. It only applies to between humans. It's an interhuman idea only, because it assumes that the being that it's concerned about has the ability to make promises, has the ability to understand, that these rights can be lost, right? When you go and rob the convenience store, you know that you're throwing away your rights to liberty, right? But when the bear decides the same thing, because he's out in some rural area, right? Some 7-Eleven way out in the middle of nowhere, and bears go by sometimes, and he's hungry, right? You're not going to call it. You might call the animal patrol. You might call the cops too, right? Because there might not be anyone else around. Call the sheriff. But the point is, you're not going to hold the bear culpable, right? And that's a huge difference, right? So, anyway, and we'll explore different ways of explaining why a bear might have moral status, even though the bear and other animals don't have rights, don't have this heavy notion of rights, that humans have in virtue of our ability to communicate them among one another, right? And our ability to understand how we surrender them, right? We seem to be the only animal that can do that, right? I don't know, maybe cetaceans, maybe, it all depends. We really need to develop more communication with other animals. It's very important, I think. Because how will we know? I don't know. I suppose you could just say they're all morally valuable, right? But anyway, it's interesting to think, as we often do, that your moral value, that your value in general as an entity is greater. The greater your intelligence and the greater your autonomy, right? That seems to be culturally, at least evident, widespread across many cultures, it seems to me. Right? That the more sophisticated the animal, the more of an emotional life the animal has, the more intelligence the animal has, the more communication the animal has, the more autonomy the animal has, the more value the animal seems to have. Right? And along that scale, it's easy to defend the notion that a human individual has greater value than just because we're cognitively much more sophisticated, right? And that is evident in our sophisticated emotions, and that's evident in our remarkably sophisticated minds. So anyway, we may be stuck there, right? And then all the rest, that keeps throwing us back to, if we are stuck there, if Baxter's right, then we're back with the prudential environmentalists, right? Which Baxter may well be. I suspect he probably was. I suspect Baxter loved hanging out with environmentalists, and he probably went skiing and probably did all kinds of outdoor recreation and stuff like that. So he wasn't necessarily anti-environmentalist, he was just meta-ethically insistent, right? That there's no way to measure rightness or wrongness except with reference to human interest, right? Because there is no normative nature, right? That's Baxter's central claim that does all this work, right? There is no normative nature, slams the door shut on all these exotic meta-ethical moves that the radical environmentalists want to make, unless they're radical environmentalists like, you know who, Brian Norton, right? That's one merit, clearly. And he doesn't have to commit himself to a bunch of exotic metaphysical commitments, right? But anyway, all right, you guys get where I'm going with all this, right? We're going to some exotic theories, right? Even Collicutt tries as hard as he can. He grips on to Darwinism with all his might, and he wants to insist, that he's still a Darwinist. But at the same time, he wants to defend the claim that ecological wholes have independent moral status. Okay? And we'll see if he gets away with that, with those two kind of basic moves. So, as I was saying, though, in a more traditional ethics class, you would study a little bit of natural law theory, and then most of the class would be taken up. About 2/3 to 3/4 of the class would be utilitarianism and deontology, right? And that's the confrontation of modernity, right? Those have been the two towering normative theories or normative traditions that have emerged out of 18th century European philosophy, okay? And virtue ethics goes way back, and now we talk about the big three, because about 50 or 60 years ago, in the middle of the 20th century, a number of primarily British analytic philosophers turned their attention and found tremendous resources for doing moral philosophy in the ancient Greeks. And so virtue ethics, which is the great and lasting contribution of the Athenians, right? That was their contribution to moral philosophy, what they call virtue ethics. So that made a great comeback in the last 50 years or so. And so now we speak about the big three, okay? Deontology. And environmental ethics, though, kind of warps, changes, transforms all of these normative traditions, right? Historically, they've all been used to justify radically anthropocentrist positions on any issue you can think of, right? Historically, that's been their function, right? So the idea that you could be an environmental ethicist who's a Kantian, right? A neo-Kantian radical, that's crazy, right? That would be crazy. But it's not so crazy, because what happens is that these they get shaken up a little bit and shifted, but the basic forms and features of these different normative theories are all evident, right? I mean, once I expose them for you, I think you should feel quite comfortable and agree with me that, for example, Holmes-Rolston should be considered a neo-Kantian. And that debate between the utilitarians and the Humeans and the Kantians, right, which was the debate raging in the 18th century, right, continues in environmental ethics, right? And some of the leading environmental ethics, the two deans, right? Baird Collicutt is a neo-Humean holistic consequentialist, and then Holmes Ralston, the other big towering figure, right, in 20th century academic. Both these guys are both still alive. I think actually Collicutt's the oldest of all. I think he's in his mid-80s now. And then Collicutt's of that generation of philosophers who most of whom were born in the 40s and 50s. And Collicutt's from that generation. So he's now probably in his early 70s. And then Ralston is in his mid-80s, I believe. But as you'll see when we get there, and Milstein too. Milstein is more accurately considered a neo-Kantian, even though you might scratch your head about that when you read her work. When you read her essay, you might think, no, man, you're fair to do that, of course. But I'm going to try to convince you that, especially compared to Collicutt's interpretation of Leopold, Milstein portrays Leopold more like, she latches onto this neo-Kantian moment in Leopold and argues, that that's really what he's doing. Right? He's not really giving us a consequentialist defense of environmental policies. He's giving us kind of a, wow, this is amazing, right? That's kind of how I've broken it up now, right? And they both rely on science, though, right? The wow, this is amazing, right? And now I'm stamping my foot with the wow, this is amazing, because that's kind of this non-consequentialist, right, conclusion. Wow, this is amazing. We got to save this. I didn't know, and then I got educated, right? I spent a whole weekend visiting this beautiful place. I had no idea. And now I realize all these ecological complexities are occurring, and these creatures that live here without, their species goes way back. And this is just, and it's just amazing. And we have every responsibility and duty to protect it, right? Now that we know how amazing it is. Our ancestors were dumb. They didn't know, right? But now we know, right? That's one way that you can use ecology and biology, right? To show yourself and to show other people that life is amazing, right? And to kind of get to this almost spiritual defense, right? Almost spiritual defense. For some people, overtly spiritual defense of strong environmental protections, right? Strong protections of species, biodiversity, rainforests, etc., right? Clean land, clean air, clean water. These things are really, really important, right? If you're just in awe at the splendor of the natural world. But you could also get there the way the utilitarians get there, right? And you can get there the way the neo-Humeans get there too, right? Perhaps. But, and those are, so anyway, but they all get transformed as they go through, right? Once you start shifting your axiological lens away from the traditional assumption that humans are the only ones that matter morally, which you have to do, right? It's an environmental ethicist. You have to start shifting your lens away. And once you do that, you can bring the normative theories along with you, right? They can rotate along with your lens, but they're going to start looking different, significantly different, So anyway, but you'll see they're also similar enough, which is why we can call them, right? And these debates continue in 20th century, as they should, in discussions about resource policy, debates about the nature of value, right? Debates about whether resource policy should be organized around how humans presently feel, for example, or should they be organized around the intrinsic value of species, right? What if you live in, let's say, if I can be a bit insulting, what if you live in a totally degenerate society that just recognizes no value in species, and all the people, literally, maybe a couple of old gray-bearded people or whatever, might see the value, but everyone else just finds no value whatsoever. And should we predicate our natural resource policy on the way people presently feel? Let's say another group, biologists, they don't live in that community, but they studied what's going on there. And they've disclosed, that all these consequences are going to occur, or they've disclosed that, wow, these things are amazing, and those community members, they don't know any of that, right? They don't know any of that science. Anyway, if we should only base our environmental management policies on how people presently feel, then damn it, clear cut the last old growth redwood forest and start pumping out some more you know, some more Justin Bieber CDs or something, right? Because that's what people want. Build more McDonald's, right? Build more car dealerships that only sell Cadillac Escalades and these giant cars, right? That's what people want, and make them cheap enough for everybody. You know, I mean, we need like mansions everywhere, right? All the way across the desert. Heck, we can just divert all the water from the Columbia, right? And move it over there to where people want to live, right? Anyway, but obviously those, so if, right, and so that would be a danger, right? If you're a utilitarian, if you're a conservationist who manages resources on the basis of what people in a consumer capitalist society want, in a society especially that's been molded by 40 years of, you know, of propaganda to be narcissistic and greedy and over-consumptive, right? Which admittedly our society is. We are that society. We've been encouraged, right? By 40, 50, 60. Anyway, Edward Bernays, you know, he started all this, and that was way back. He was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, right? He created the whole American propaganda. They don't call it propaganda really, but you know, the molding of consumers, the hollowing out of the citizen, right? The transformation of the citizen strictly into a consumer. That's all done by mass marketing, you know. Anyway, so perhaps, you know, the conservationists are at a distinct disadvantage if they want to defend, you know, resource protectionism in a society where the value of resource protectionism isn't recognized. Then perhaps, you know, the environmentalist wants, you know, would be better served to turn to a deontological argument, right? That says no, we should base our decisions not on how people feel, but on what we know to be to be right, what we know to be our duty, right? And they claim in a nutshell that we know our duty automatically once we recognize the moral status of the entity, which may be, anyway. And I want to take a break right now, okay? So come back in 5 minutes, and we'll just continue on this review, all right? We're going to do some really important work on consequentialism versus non-consequentialism. Well, and I do have your, I did grade all of your summaries. So why don't I place them over here? What's your name? Jason who? Yeah, I did get that. I haven't printed anything out yet. It's too early. Yeah, I mean, I'll print it out later.
I was wondering if you needed to get it.
Oh no, now that you've already done that, just leave it the way it is. Well, we'll do, that's A through F, I think, or something, and then A through whatever comes before J, H, I, A through I, and then J through T is there, and then we'll do R through T, and then we'll do pretty well on that. Actually, and then the rest of them. All right. So anyway, yeah, you can pick up your midterms. People did. I mean, not your midterms. What am I saying? You can pick up your. You just turned in your midterms. Your summary of Schweitzer, right? That's what I was grading over the weekend, yes. Right. I had a very busy weekend.
Did the print be just printed or printed and descended?
Just one or the other. I prefer that they were printed here.
No, that's what.
Yeah.
No sé, no sé la verdad. Espero que me vaya.
Vamos a ver.
Sí, espero que me vaya muy bien. Espero que te vaya muy bien.
Estoy pensando en un súper.
Ajá. Mira, que veo más tarde.
You don't think Schweitzer uses a little bit of Greek
He does. Well, he's writing in a religious tradition. he doesn't hesitate to use the word reverence. And he seems like he's, I mean, his faith is public, and his faith is I mean, it's not in your face with it, but I think he uses that language. But he's not making a really, he's not making a really natural law.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
It's not a good idea.
Yeah, no, it's not like, well,
The Greek
Plus we don't have
lawyer,
like to deal with any other sound of
no, analogy is what it says. He makes the claim
well, I only create it when I have salad.
No.
I have salad.
is that there are certain.
I could see that, like, you go into a salad bar or something, and like, oh, we don't have like the flavor I like for salad.
Reduction to fully instrumental status.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm
It's
really
simple,
trying to
consistent with what mechanistically is the case,
people rarely have, but.
right?
Yeah.
It's irrational, and in being irrational, it's immoral to reduce. For Kant, right, for the classical Enlightenment deontologists, that just means, what has moral status for human beings? Human being is an end in herself or herself.
Well, it's kind of the same.
Yes, sure, exactly. The Kantians definitely want to say that their descriptions of moral truth are more comprehensive, more accurate than those offered by the utilitarians. I'll have to go get some water.
I usually feel okay drinking this, if it's being usually in the bottle, but then once you put it in an orange cup, it just looks so much less appetizing when it's not in the bottle.
I think the orange cup just doesn't have anything like that. Orange is not a really appealing color when it comes to like flavors.
Orange doesn't have any color anywhere. I feel like it tastes different now that I have to see the orange. It's contaminated.
I guess very when you get people to not be what they should be, put it in different colors. And so I found the color of one particular kid. Oh, you could have here.
Or give them a really cool cup or bowl, anything that you put in that bowl.
Well, they used to have those ones that like had the plates at the bottom of the plate, so it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I don't know if that like had something like that, and maybe it's more inclined. They drink Aldi one stuff because it's a bit like the cooler things, you know, like you get to see it, so like they're not holding it.
I could eat the outside, decorate your outside.
All right, this is all. I think we already understand everything on this page of notes quite well. This is the broad distinction that we start with, and I think it's fair to expect. First of all, it's perfectly fair for students to respond by pointing out that in some important ways the different normative theories we're examining this term, someone might say, well, all those academics, they don't know what they're talking about because, in fact, my understanding of my moral obligations, whatever, to the extent I have moral obligations, isn't accounted for. That's not how I understand my obligations. That's the utilitarians. They might have part of it, and the Kantians might, but there are other things going on, right? Anyway, so I say to those students, I say absolutely, and be creative, and don't ever close off your moral imagination, right? Don't assume that, these theories, the big three in particular, right, have withstood the test of time. They've been around for a long time, right? Virtue ethics has been around 2,400 years at least, and probably many thousands of years longer than that, right? Because by the time it got to be written down by the Athenians, and every culture, by the way, every culture, I boldly make this claim, but every culture has, if you go back far enough, has a body of narratives, of guidances to human beings about how to live, And that those traditions about how to live in every culture can be described as a virtue ethics traditions, right? And you'd be surprised at how many virtue ethics traditions there are out there that we could name that people practice today all the time. I'd go so far as to say that every outdoor recreation activity is a type of virtue ethic, right? Surfing, snowboarding, and I would say yoga, right? Yoga obviously is a virtue ethic. Anyway, but some people might, okay, so and another thing I respond, right? People want to say, yeah, I can see how my moral reasoning is clarified after, when I understand utilitarianism and virtue ethics and deontology. Yeah, my moral reasoning is clarified, and that's kind of helpful, but there's still something more going on. Anyway, it seems to me that asking this question is fair of all people, who offer themselves as who employ their moral imagination. However you employ your moral imagination, I think it's fair to include an answer, right? Are you directed by consequentialist concerns, or are you directed more by some species of non-consequentialist concern? Okay? And so at the very least, right, you can get a handle on that. You might get that out of this ethics class, right? A lot of the rest of our work might seem pointless, but learning the hallmarks of how your own thinking works might be helpful. In general, consequentialists, more normative theories look to future consequences. The two kinds of consequentialist theories we've looked fairly closely at are utilitarianism, obviously, and then conservationism, as practiced, for example, by someone like a classical conservationist like Pinchot, who even Pinchot was a rural utilitarian, though, right? Anyway, and then Leopold, the neo-Humean, non-utilitarian Leopold, but not yet the neo-Kantian, right? The neo is also a consequentialist. So I like to describe utilitarianism as individuated, until you get to rural utilitarianism, right? But certainly act utilitarianism is individuated consequentialism, right? And it's predicated on feelings felt by an individual human being, right? Feelings of happiness or feelings of unhappiness. And then Leopoldian land ethics. Leaving aside the neo-Kantian moment, right? If we interpret Leopold as a consequentialist, then Leopoldian land ethics should be described as holistic, not individuated consequentialism, but holistic consequentialism. Or you could say community consequentialism, right? As opposed to utilitarianism, which is just individuated. Anyway, that's how I like to distinguish those two. And those are the two that we'll look at. In general, radical environmental policies are predicated on concerns about the whole, right? So radical environmentalism generally falls in some kind of holistic category, right? You're either a holistic anthropocentrist, like Norton, or you're, just a hardcore, more than anthropocentric, radical environmentalist, like we'll see Collicutt makes Leopold into, and we'll see Rolston is full bore. So notice how very differently the consequentialist conceives her work, right? The consequentialist moral philosophy conceives her work as being an empirical inquiry. Strictly an empirical inquiry done using scientific research, right? The basic guiding question is, do our decisions lead to greater happiness on the whole or greater unhappiness? And then in general, non-consequentialist normative theories look to the past for moral guidance. They look toward moral principles that have already been established, right? Leaving out concern about the future, right? Not leaving out concern, but not specific future consequences. Principles established, right? Already that we bring with us. And then we start plugging them into, right, outcomes. But the outcomes aren't what ultimately matters, right, for the non-consequentialist. Non-consequentialist ethicists do not locate the moral or immoral quality. Note the precise language, right? We're talking here about what is that quality which makes an action moral or immoral. For the non-consequentialist, it's not the consequence. Consequence is important, obviously. You can't escape realizing, right? Everyone knows that. But the moral quality for the non-consequentialist is, for example, in its violation of the principle, don't instrumentalize human beings, right? All right. For a non-consequentialist, the moral quality of a decision is located in its conformity. And then other examples, right? The most familiar non-consequentialist source of moral reasoning is religion in general. In Abrahamic cultures, then we would probably say the Bible. Yeah. Although the Islamic are Islamic cousins, I think they have different words. So for their book, but their book includes part of our book too. So yes, so it would be the Bible. That's one answer. But in general, religious, right? Yeah, that's true, right? And that may account partly indirectly for the disdain that some young philosophers have toward non-consequentialist theories, because that non-consequentialist approach to doing moral philosophy is viewed, understood by some people who have had trouble with some religious authorities, in which I don't blame you. You know, that's why I stay away from that stuff. I don't want to get in trouble like that. But anyway, so some people, you know, they want to dissociate themselves with non-consequentialist moral reasoning, right? Because non-consequentialist moral reasoning is tainted. Because it's true, right? There is a very popular, right? That's where a lot of these foot stampers come from, right? These objectivists, they do wander around with a giant big book in the air saying my way or the highway, right? And that's a little bit obnoxious, you know? Probably more obnoxious than just, you know, the whatever dude, you know. Those subjectivists are much easier to get along with, right? Than the my way or the highway. So anyway, so that's kind of scary, right? But don't worry. There are thousand-year-old traditions of moral reasoning that have nothing to do with the Bible and have nothing to do with any religion at all. Okay? So, be friendly with non-consequentialism, and don't think that non-consequentialism is hopelessly tainted with religion, because it isn't. And that was the whole point of Kant, right? That was the whole, Kant's whole inspiration was to provide us with a moral philosophy that was expressly not predicated on any kind of religious doctrine. Okay? Kant was a great humanist. All these Enlightenment figures are great humanists, right? Kant replaces religion with anthropos. Okay? That's what happens. With Kant, the foundation of morality becomes humanism, right? And we get this great age of humanism that gives birth to all these democracies and this flowering of culture. And a whole bunch of bad stuff too, excuse me, you know, it's not like I'm just, and obviously all of colonialism and the conquest of peoples all over the world, destruction and genocide and ecocide went hand in hand with a lot of the Enlightenment too. So, but hopefully that stuff we get over with, right? Enlightenment is going to help us get over those bad aspects of the human, anyway, of our history. But let's keep moving here. So those are the two, right? I already went over this page of notes without even turning to it. But utilitarianism can be thought of as individualistic. Consequentialism, communitarian consequentialism would be. So, right, both the utilitarians and the neo-Humeans have the same ancestry, right? And that ancestry is David Hume and you know, the Scottish Enlightenment, right?